My name is Rabbi Sachs, Yaakov Sachs, coming to you live from the Chai Center in Dix Hills, New York. We've been traveling together on a fascinating journey, talking about different Jewish personalities, and we've gone through the good, the bad, the ugly. The previous class was Samson Raphael Hirsch, the founder of modern neo-orthodoxy, and today we're going to be talking about Karl Marx, not my favorite character. Now, while I have reverence for Samson Raphael Hirsch, I have absolutely no reverence, no love lost between myself and Karl Marx. As we'll journey along, and we'll see. Each class is independent, so one does not have to be concerned that I missed the previous class. So Karl Marx, he was born in Prussia, which is in Germany. It's in the Lower Rhine, and it's actually not. I think it borders Luxembourg, if I'm correct. His father converted to Christianity, and then when Karl Marx was 6, he converted. The father converted the children to Christianity, and a year later, the mother converted. So Karl Marx really never had any type of Jewish upbringing. But what's interesting is his maternal grandfather was a rabbi. His paternal grandfather actually came from a long line of rabbis. It was his father that broke the chain, but his grandfather and great-grandfather and great-grandfather were all rabbis. His grandfather was called Meir Halevi, and his father was Heinrich. He wasn't born Heinrich; he was born Herschel. But once he converted to Lutheran, he changed it to Heinrich. His father was a lawyer, well-to-do, had a beautiful house. They also had vineyards that they owned. So they were a comfortable family. His mother was Jewish. Her name was Jenny Pressburg, and she is related to the Philip Electric Company, which is a huge company, and tobacco, electronics, I should say, and in Europe, and they were related. And Jenny's sister married a Philip also. One of the children of the Philips, actually is credited. I think Leon Phillips. He's credited with saving 300 and something Jews from the Holocaust. He was actually awarded, an award by Yad Vashem for his heroic efforts. Karl Marx was the third in line, but he became the eldest son and the eldest child, because his siblings passed. And as I said, they were baptized, and they were baptized Lutheran, which I guess in Germany makes sense, Lutheran, but nothing makes sense. But they were converted Lutheran. For the first 12 years of his life, his father homeschooled him. His father, once again, was an educated person, and so he was homeschooled. And then after that, he was sent to school, local school, which was extremely liberal. And that started his journey. So he was inculcated while young to have ideas that were actually the conservatives in his city were very angry at the school for teaching the kids what they felt was radical stuff. And in fact, the local board of ed came in, and they forced them to change the curriculum because it was considered inappropriate and too radical. At 17, he went to college. He went to Bonn University. He wanted to study philosophy. He was drawn to philosophy, and that's what he was all about. However, his father, the practical fellow, said, "No, you got to study law." So he at 18 he joined various groups. One of them was called the Poets Club, and apparently the Poets Club was a front for extremely radical views, which would end up causing him to write his manifesto. So when he was it was when he would join the Poets Club, he got very involved. He was actually the president of the Poets Club. The problem was his grades were slipping. So his father took him out of the college in Bonn and transferred him to the University of Berlin. In the University of Berlin, he dedicated his time and pretty much the rest of his life studying philosophy. Gans, Hegel, they had tremendous influence on his life. And essentially the philosophy was that it is the wealthy are the wealthy, and the rest of the people are slaves to the wealthy. And the only way to overthrow is where the revolution comes from the people, and then there'll be equality. Essentially, that's what he studied. The very first works that he did, which were actually published posthumously, was he wrote novel, fiction, novel. He also wrote poetry, which he dedicated to his wife, Jenny. Then he wrote a thesis, which was considered too radical for the time, so the University of Berlin would not accept it. So he handed it into the University of Jena, and they awarded him with a PhD. So he had a doctorate of philosophy, and once again it was all on the capitalistic theme, and more focused on equality. He got a job as a journalist, and he was writing articles, which basically was preaching communism. He was writing articles against the Tsar, who was in control then, ruled a large chunk of land. And then finally, the Tsar intervened, and the Tsar told the paper that they either censure this, or they don't publish, or the newspaper's done. So the newspaper agreed to censure, and Marx was no longer allowed to just write whatever he wanted to write. It was censored, and he was very upset about it. He says, in Germany, you want to write something, it first has to pass the Tsar's sniff, and then once it passed the Tsar's sniff, it has to pass the police sniff. So he was pretty upset, and in general they were keeping an eye on him because they felt he was too much of a radical, and he went to France. Germany banned his writings, so he went to France. And in France, he joined with other radicals, and they actually printed their own paper. I think the Rouge or Rouget was the editor of the paper, and it was this paper. Specifically is where he wrote his diatribe, his anti-Semitic, self-hating diatribe of the Jewish question. In this book, in this pamphlet, really, on the Jewish question, booklet, he said, what is the Jew? What is the Jew's God? The Jew's God is money, and we have to emancipate ourselves from the idol of the Jew. And it was terrible. Eventually, that paper was shut down, and so he moved to Brussels, and then he was a persona non grata, and he moved to England, In England, he was a journalist in the Daily Tribune. He didn't make much money. His family pretty much lived in poverty because he dedicated his time to writing things that really, weren't so accepted, embraced back then. I don't think they're embraced now. It's interesting. When I became a citizen of the United States, I wasn't born here. So part of the application, and it's twice, the original application, and then again on the day you're sworn in. This is how it was. You had to swear off communism. You had to attest that you were not a member of the Nazi Party. Because if you didn't swear off communism, or you remember the Nazi Party, you couldn't become a citizen. I don't know if that's true today. I don't know, but that's what it was back then. There is a rumor that he cheated on his wife Jenny and had a legitimate kid. That rumor is not, and the kid's name was Freddie or something. But that it's not quite proven. He had 7 children. Only 3 children survived. Once again, he lived in poverty, and it just wasn't a healthy atmosphere for his kids. There was different. Nowadays we have antibiotics for a lot of the things they didn't have. What's interesting, and this is totally not a Jewish concept, but because he was such an atheist and agnostic and brought up in a secular home, so he had of his 3 girls survive. Their first name was Jenny. Their mother's name was Jenny. So they were like Jenny something, Jenny something, Jenny something. I don't know if he was related to the Marx brothers. I don't know. I mean, he was a joke, in my opinion, so maybe. Now, he used to write, he used to study, and he had pen names and nicknames because he was a persona non grata. So different authorities were looking for him. So he had nicknames to prevent, and multiple nicknames. So he was called Moore because of his look. In England, he was called A. Williams. That was the name that he chose. And he had other nicknames. Even his kids like called him Stanley or something as a nickname, as opposed to Karl, which was less common. So it's just an interesting thing. So he basically studied. He was a scholar, and his philosophy was inequality, and very radical, extremely to the left, and his kids, his wife and kids, lived in poverty and lived in squalor. He was in poor health in his 60s. He was in poor health because he was always a drinker. From the time he was in the Poets Club, and throughout his life, he consumed alcohol. Now, he also smoked cigars. Now, because he didn't have money, the alcohol, which is even good quality alcohol, was no good for anybody, but it was bad quality alcohol, and the cigars were also of bad quality. And he had he had so many different issues. I mean, he had liver issues, he had blood clots, and he had boils, and he had skin issues, and there was just so many different things. And he also he had liver, kidney, internal organs. He had issues. Now, his wife Jenny died a year before he did, but when he died, he was buried in London, and he was buried in the East Highgate section of a cemetery, and he was buried in the atheist, agnostic section. Later on, he was actually moved to a different section where he is today, and they have that whole monument dedicated to him. Now, what's interesting is, even though he had a pretty large following of people is that very few people attended his funeral. So his family came, and there were a few philosophers who came. Hegel came, etc., etc. But and there's different disagreements. Some people say he had 9 people, less than a million. Others say that he had 20 people. Others said he had up to 30 people. But clearly, for a man of his stature, the man of, he was a well-published author. Hey, like I am. And he had very few people at his funeral. Now, some say that there was a notice was printed in the paper that Karl Marx, the great philosopher, and rabid anti-Semite, Karl Marx had died, but it listed the incorrect information. He said he was going to be buried in France. By the time they caught the error and a correction was made, the funeral had already taken place. So the monument that we speak of had a slogan on the monument. It's there today, should you care. It's probably the second to last place I would have interest in going. There was a slogan there: workers of all lands unite. And other family members were buried there, and it became kind of the Marx section. And near it, there's a Karl Marx museum, and thus ended his life. He became more famous after he died. He developed more of a following after he died. So his book, the Communist, Manifesto, which is basically the playbook for communism, is the Bible of communism, which was adopted by the Bolsheviks and et cetera, and then by Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin, etc. That became more popular after he died. Das Kapital, he wrote. He was a very extremely prolific author. Clearly, he was very smart. Now, I just, so he was Jewish. He was Jewish. So the question is, like, if he came into our synagogue, if Karl Marx walked in, right, and we needed a minyan, would I include him in a minyan or not? So that's tricky, and the answer is probably yes. He was Jewish. He may have converted and turned his back on Jews and Judaism. I mean, he didn't cause direct death like Trotsky, but he wrote this anti-Semitic book, which ultimately led to a lot of pain and suffering. I may not have included in the minyan because he was a rogue. He was a nasty individual. He shunned God. He turned his back on God and on his people, etc., etc. But I would never not include him in the minyan because the quorum, because he's not a Jew. He was a Jew, so he converted. Big deal. Still a Jew. Born a Jew, you die a Jew, right? Daniel Pearl said that, and Ed Koch said that, and that's the fact. So, to his chagrin, he couldn't really get rid of his Jewishness. Doesn't matter what you believe. Doesn't matter what you do with your belief. He was Jewish. He was Jewish. Now, he obviously, once again, he had no religion whatsoever. He converted Lutheran, it meant nothing. He was an atheist. I'm not even sure his parents weren't atheists also. So he's brought up with no religion, and therefore, in my opinion, communism became his religion. You have to have something to focus on. You have to have something to be a focal point in your life. And if it's not God, and if it's not for this cause or that cause, this good cause or that good cause, it's going to be substituted by something else. And this substitution happened to be communism. And if the thousands or tens of thousands of people that I've met I've noticed a common denominator that when they're bereft of all and every spirituality, they adopt something that's so really foreign to who they really are and to their spark of holiness. And that's because they're trying to fill a void, and the only thing that satisfies them is something that's they're religious about their atheism. Their atheism, Karl Marx's atheism, was his religion. His communism, where he negated God and negated others, was his religion. That's what I'm trying to say. He had no organized religion or communal religion or any standing or foot in a synagogue or connection with God. So therefore, he made his own. He made his own. And I see it. I see it time and time again. You know, in America today, many Jews, their politics become their religion. Republican, Democrat, whatever it is, it becomes their religion to the exclusion of all else. And it's actually a sad state of affairs. It's a sad statement. But that's the way I see it with Karl Marx. I don't know what his Jewish name was when he was born. He didn't necessarily have one. But that's what I see, with Moshe Marx, is that he was searching. He was soul searching, and he found it. He found it in something that's an antithetical to God, anathema to the Jewish people. But that's what he found. What's interesting is that is there such a thing as in other words, were there Jews that came from Karl Marx, third generation, fourth generation? Were they even Jewish, or did they just completely lose it and didn't retain it? And that's what we're trying to do, right? In 2021, when this course is being offered, is really it's a race against time. We're trying to preserve the Jewish identity. Is there such a thing as a third generation Jew if you're an atheist, if you're an agnostic? I don't believe there is. And if there is, it's by chance, perchance, it's luck. It's not because of any hard work. Just one man's opinion. Feel free to comment here. Feel free to send me an email, rabbi@thechaicenter.com. You may view all previous classes at thechaicenter.com/academy, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com, and type in Chai Academy. God bless. Feedback is always helpful. Sharing for us to gain more viewership and more support, moral support for sure. Is if you share it, it'd be appreciated. Of course, if you want to know more about what makes me tick, is I just wrote a book. It's called The Kabbalah of Life, and it can be found on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and any fine bookstore. God bless.